Richard Nixon's advisors were worried how their candidate would look on camera. Besides his weight loss, there was the troublesome matter of his pale skin and heavy beard. TV cameras made him look like he had a 5 o'clock shadow, even after a fresh shave. CBS had provided a professional makeup artist for each of the candidates, but both declined, presumably because they didn't want to be labeled actors instead of presidential candidates. Kennedy had a healthy tan, and he looked fine, but Nixon, his staff pleaded with him to let the makeup artist work on him, but Nixon refused. Finally, a Nixon aide ran down to a drugstore on Michigan Avenue and picked up a container of Lazy Shave, a kind of powder, to cover up his 5 o'clock shadow. As millions of viewers were to find out, it didn't work very well.
Mr. Smith, Senator Kennedy.
Nixon's first statement was well delivered in his familiar style, but viewers were stunned at how haggard he looked next to Kennedy.
I know what it means to be poor. I know what it means to see people who are unemployed. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do. But our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals.
As the debate progressed, viewers noticed something else. When Kennedy was talking, he maintained steady eye contact with the home audience.
I come out of the Democratic Party, which in this century has produced Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and which supported and sustained these programs which I've discussed tonight.
When he wasn't talking, he seemed to be listening intently but calmly to his opponent.
Awfully glad you got that question, because as you know, I got into it at the last of my other question and wasn't able to complete the argument.
Nixon, on the other hand, followed more traditional debate style. When he was speaking, he often turned away from the home audience to look at his opponent, thus giving the impression at times that he was actually seeking Kennedy's approval. And when Nixon was not speaking, he often looked nervously around the studio, sometimes glancing at CBS News President Sig Mickelson, who was acting as official timekeeper. All of this triggered what might be called the debate over the debate, which went on long after the cameras were turned off. One of the biggest flaps was over the selection and timing of what are known as reaction shots. Those were chosen by Director Hewitt, who is remembered that night as something of a hyperactive symphony conductor. Throughout the broadcast, he would leap from his seat and shout commands to the technicians. For example, take one, take two. It might be a shot of Nixon reacting to what Kennedy was saying. Now, this is standard procedure in television. The only problem was the Nixon people didn't like the shots of their candidate.
I voted in favor of that proposal and supported it strongly.
The Nixon staff felt the reaction shots of him were too close or too tight and were, as a result, very unflattering. They also criticized the timing of the shots, saying that Hewitt had picked moments when Nixon looked uncomfortable, like the long shots that showed him favoring the knee that was giving him pain. But the big problem was the hot TV lights included extra lights that Nixon's own TV advisors thought would help illuminate his sunken eyes. The extra 650-watt spotlights, together with the regular studio lights, caused Nixon to perspire profusely. And the sweat, mixed with the lazy shave that an aide had hastily dabbed on, made him look terrible. Before the debate, Nixon had asked Hewitt not to take any shots of him mopping his face, and Hewitt agreed. Only one wide shot, inadvertently taken, shows the vice president wiping his lip. But even so, the contrast was unavoidable. Nixon, who looked thoroughly wilted, and Kennedy, who remained cool as a cucumber. The Kennedy people thought all the reaction shots of both men were just fine, partly because their man looked so good, and also because he got 11 shots totaling 118 seconds to Nixon's 9 shots for a total of 85 seconds. In other words, for a candidate who looks good and needs to be better identified among voters, the more screen time, the better. In defense of his shots, Hewitt would later say he was told by CBS brass to call him as he saw him, and that's what he did, in an effort to give the home audience the best sense of how each man was reacting to what the other was saying. But CBS and Hewitt weren't the only targets of Nixon's staff criticism. Sander Van Oker, then of NBC, was one of the 4 reporters on the panel. It was he who brought up Ike's famous comment about Nixon.
Now, in his news conference on August 24th, President Eisenhower was asked to give one example of a major idea of yours that he adopted. His reply was, and I'm quoting, "If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember." Now, that was a month ago, sir, and the president hasn't brought it up since. And I'm wondering, sir, if you can clarify Which version is correct? The one put out by Republican campaign leaders or the one put out by President Eisenhower?
Well, I would suggest, Mr. Van Oker, that if you know the president, that was probably a facetious remark.
When it was over, even that exchange would become lost in the debate over how the candidates had appeared during their confrontation. Down the hall, typewriters and teletypes were clicking away, and within hours, the debate was being reported and discussed in every paper in the land. But what the squadron of reporters who covered the event could not transmit into print was the sheer impact of what the television cameras had revealed. The appearance of a young challenger confidently on the attack. A two-term vice president apparently crumbling under the pressure. After the broadcast, Nixon slipped quickly out the back door, but Kennedy came out the front and offered reporters the understatement of the evening.
Tell us what your reaction was to the debate.
Well, I thought it was an interesting evening.
Obscured by the tall candidate and the crowd around him, Mayor Richard Daley said he knew a winner when he saw one.
Terrific. Kennedy looked like Wilson, Truman, and Roosevelt put together.
Others in the crowd were just as committed for Nixon.
As far as I'm concerned, it was Nixon all the way. Why, Kennedy was outclassed. There was no comparison.
Arguments over who really won the debate would go on for years. Ironically, people who listened on the radio thought Nixon had won. But survey after survey of people who saw the debate on TV revealed a majority believed Kennedy was the victor. More importantly, surveys also showed that among the audience of some 70 million were huge numbers of independent and undecided voters who voted for Kennedy because of what they saw that night. As for what the candidates themselves thought, Kennedy was ecstatic, and as he campaigned the following week in Ohio, he rarely missed a chance to tell the crowds, as I said on television Monday night, after his incredibly narrow election victory, Kennedy would add, it was television more than anything that turned the tide. And Richard Nixon? His reaction was quite different. He too went back on the campaign trail, but he had little to say about the great debate.